The first door that scared me was not locked. That is the part people kept missing. It had power. It had a working panic bar. The little red sign above it still had battery backup. The school district had already paid for cleanup. The air tests had come back acceptable, and a contractor had taped a fresh certificate to the front window before sunrise. By a little after 8 in the morning, a teacher on the second floor pushed that door during a fire alarm drill, and it opened 3 inches, then stopped against a ridge of gray-white growth packed inside the frame. She shoved it with both hands. 2 fifth graders pushed with her. The door bent inward at the top. The bottom held tight because something had swollen around the threshold during the night. That was the first time I said out loud, on camera, that we were no longer dealing with mold in the normal sense, and I wish to God the city had listened right then. I had been standing in the hallway outside the media center at Gravois Arts Elementary with my clipboard tucked under my arm, watching the maintenance supervisor argue with a contractor who swore the building was ready. I could smell damp insulation before I saw any growth. There is a certain smell in old St. Louis buildings after a long wet season. Wet brick, old plaster, rusted pipe hangers, floor wax, dust from ceiling tile, and a sour edge from carpet backing that has held too much water. People panic over ordinary mold all the time. They see black staining on caulk or fuzz behind a soda machine and want the whole place condemned. Most of that is bad housekeeping, bad drainage, failed seals, leaky roofs, clogged condensate pans, stuff you fix with discipline and money. This was different. The odor was not stronger in the basement. It was stronger near the supply vents. That sounds small until you work buildings for a living. Water damage follows gravity and pressure. Flood water comes up from below or in through doors. Roof water comes down through decks, flashing, seams, drains, and old cracks. Steam leaks leave trails. Condensation forms where warm, wet air meets cold surfaces in a school, a hospital, an apartment tower, or an office building. Those patterns tell you where to start opening walls. That morning, the pattern made no normal sense. The gym smelled cleaner than the hallway outside it, even though the gym roof had been patched 3 times. The basement mechanical room had staining, sure, but not enough to explain why ceiling panels near the library had sagged and turned soft overnight. The worst growth sat inside duct runs, return grills, and the dead space above new acoustic panels installed during a renovation 2 years earlier. The local news crew was there because the parents had been mad for 3 days. A school closing makes people angry fast. I get it. Folks have jobs. Buses run on tight routes. Grandparents get pulled into childcare with no warning. The district kept saying mold remediation because that is a phrase people understand. Mold remediation means the scary word has a schedule. A contractor, a bill, and an end date. A crew in white suits comes in, plastic goes up, machines hum, stained material leaves in bags, then children come back. That is what the city wanted this to be. That is what I wanted it to be. Nobody sane wants to look at a school full of backpacks and little coats and say the building itself may be unsafe to occupy. I was on camera for maybe 2 minutes at first. The reporter asked if parents were overreacting. I told her no. And I told her the problem was not the patch on the wall everyone kept filming. I pointed to the return vent above the trophy case and told her that the filters were loading too fast for ordinary dust. I said the growth was inside the air side of the building, not just on the wet side. She asked if it was dangerous. I said any building that pushes unknown spores through occupied rooms is dangerous until proven otherwise. The contractor behind me started shaking his head before I even finished. He told the cameras the word spore was inflammatory. That was the first time I heard him use that exact phrase. By the end of the week, I heard the same phrase from 3 different contractors, 2 city spokesmen, and 1 lawyer. We had just finished that interview when the fire alarm went off. At first, everybody did the board school drill routine. Teachers checked doors, kids lined up. The news camera swung toward the front entrance because drama looks neat when people walk in rows. I stayed where I was because I heard the alarm relay click but did not hear the air handlers shut down. In most buildings, during a fire alarm, the air system either stops, changes mode, or responds by sequence, so smoke does not get carried through occupied spaces. This system kept blowing. Not hard, not loud, but enough that I could see dust moving at the return grills. Then the teacher at the stairwell shouted that the door was stuck. Not jammed, not blocked by a chair, stuck from inside the frame. I got there with a maintenance supervisor and a custodian named Len, who had been in that building longer than half the teachers had been alive. Len had a pry bar from his cart. The growth in the frame had the texture of wet fiberboard near the surface, but underneath it was packed and springy. It came out in gray strips with tan strands running through it. The strands were threaded into the paint cracks and around the screw heads in the hinge plate. I had seen fungus move through wood, drywall, paper, carpet backing, and damp insulation. I had never seen it build pressure in a metal fire door frame overnight. I had never seen it grow thickest at the side of the door where hallway air flowed through the gap. We got the door open enough to move the children, and nobody died that morning. That is important, because later people described Gravois Arts as a disaster from the jump. It was not. It was an almost disaster, which is why the city tried to bury it in paperwork. A bad air sample can be argued with. A swollen ceiling panel can be blamed on an old leak. A stuck fire door during a drill means somebody has to admit the building's life safety systems are compromised. That word matters. Compromise means you cannot promise the exits, alarms, dampers, wiring, sprinklers, ceilings, and ventilation will behave when people need them. The first official statement that afternoon said the school would remain closed, out of an abundance of caution. That phrase got people to calm down for maybe an hour. Then the calls started coming in from other places. A charter school near Cherokee Street had a staff bathroom exhaust fan packed solid with the same gray growth. A clinic off Kings Highway had supply diffusers sweating brown water even though the roof was dry. A brick apartment building in Soulard had tenants coughing on the third floor, but the basement laundry room was cleaner than anybody expected. A rehabbed warehouse near Washington Avenue had ceiling tiles dropping in neat sections under the new duct trunk, not under the old roof drains. A hospital wing in the central West End smelled damp in every patient room tied to one air handler, while the older wing next door smelled normal. That was when I stopped thinking in single buildings. Inspectors hate patterns because patterns make you responsible. One bad building belongs to the owner. One bad contractor belongs to procurement. One bad school belongs to the district. A pattern belongs to everyone who signed off, passed the inspection, approved the budget, ignored the maintenance notes, and told the public it was handled. I went back through reports I had saved from the wet spring. Old brick structures, new renovations, basement complaints, duct cleaning invoices, filter replacement logs, emergency calls, insurance notes, photos from maintenance staff. The reports did not follow the Mississippi River flood line. They did not follow one neighborhood. They followed air handling systems, old utility chases, storm drain connections, and buildings renovated with the same interior insulation package. The contractor name was Crossfield Response Services. I am saying it because everybody knows it now, and because hiding names helped this thing spread. Crossfield was not some fly-by-night crew with a van and a pressure washer. They had city contracts, school district contracts, hospital overflow contracts, apartment remediation work, and a nice clean website full of words that sounded responsible. They did water mitigation after storms. They replaced acoustic panels. They lined ducts. They sealed old masonry walls with vapor control coatings. They installed a recycled cellulose mineral insulation product called Thermacell board, which was marketed as low-cost, fire-resistant, and environmentally smart. On paper, it looked fine. On a clipboard, it looked fine. Behind walls, after a wet season, it became the first food source. I am not a scientist. I am a building inspector. I know enough biology to know when to shut my mouth and call people who own microscopes. But I know buildings better than most lab people, and the early failure was that nobody put both sides together. The lab folks looked at samples in sealed containers. The contractors looked at walls as jobs. The health department looked at symptoms. The school district looked at attendance. The hospital looked at bed capacity. The city looked at press risk. The fungus did not care about anybody's department. It moved through air, moisture, heat, and porous material. It used our buildings exactly the way our buildings were built to move air around people. The second day, I was asked to come to a local morning show and explain whether the public should worry. I did not want to go. I had 3 sites to inspect and a stack of calls from people who suddenly thought every water stain in St. Louis was alive. My supervisor told me the city wanted one calm technical voice. That should have been a warning. When a city wants a calm technical voice, it usually means the people with real authority are not ready to say what they know. I sat under studio lights with my jacket still smelling of crawlspace dust and told people the plain truth. If a building has visible growth near vents, recurring damp odor, unexplained coughing that gets worse indoors, or filters clogging after only days, do not treat it with bleach and a box fan. Turn off the affected air system if it can be done safely, leave the area, and call building maintenance or local health officials. The host asked if this was black mold. That is what everybody asks because the internet trained people to fear one color. I said color is not enough. Black, green, white, gray, tan, orange, pink, all of it depends on organism, material, age, moisture, light, and dust. The dangerous part was not the color. The dangerous part was that it was inside systems meant to carry air. I told people not to scrape it, not to vacuum it with household equipment, not to spray it and stand there breathing the mist. I said a school, a hospital, or an apartment building cannot be reopened just because visible material has been wiped away. If the organism is in duct liner, pipe insulation, wall cavities, ceiling plenums, or porous fireproofing, then the hidden contamination matters more than the stain people can see. That clip ran all day, and by dinner I had angry messages from building owners. One man called me a fear merchant. Another said I was going to bankrupt small landlords. A facilities director I had known for years texted me one sentence. "You are right and I hate it." That one stayed with me. He worked at a long-term care facility in South County. His maintenance team had changed filters 4 times in 9 days. The filters came out heavy and damp with gray fibers that held together when touched. Patients with breathing problems were getting worse in one hallway. The nursing staff thought it was the weather. The building administrator did not want to move residents because moving frail people causes harm too. That is how the first week went. Every choice hurt somebody. By the 3rd day, the first hospital video leaked. It was not dramatic in the way people expect. No screaming. No creature in the hall. Just a respiratory therapist recording a ceiling over a nurse station while brown droplets fell from a light fixture into a trash can. The fixture should not have had water above it. The roof was not leaking. The pipe above it was dry. The moisture was forming inside the plenum because the fungal mat had clogged return airflow, trapped humidity. and turned the space above the ceiling into a wet chamber. Ceiling panels sagged around sprinkler heads. Low-voltage wiring trays were coated. A fire alarm junction box had corrosion on terminals that were cleaned during a maintenance inspection 2 months earlier. That is what people need to understand. The buildings did not become scary because they looked strange. They became deadly because they stopped performing basic functions. A building is a promise people rarely think about. The floor holds. The lights work, the exit opens, the air is breathable, the ceiling stays above your head. Water comes from the right pipes and waste leaves through the right pipes. Wires stay dry. Fire doors close when fire spreads and open when people need to leave. Elevators do not matter during a fire, but stairs do. Smoke control matters. Negative pressure rooms matter, dampers matter, airflow matters. When this organism got into those systems, every promise had to be checked again from zero. You could not walk through a lobby with a flashlight and say the building was clear. You had to open access panels, trace ducts, inspect fan coils, test dampers, pull filters, check electrical rooms, look behind baseboards, and find where warm air had been moving while everybody was asleep. The city did not have enough people for that. No city does. St. Louis has old brick schools, converted warehouses, hospitals tied into tunnels, apartment buildings with mystery renovations from the 1970s, basements that take water every spring, and mechanical rooms where 3 generations of workers have patched one system on top of another. Add abandoned buildings, court disputes, underfunded schools, privately managed apartments, and hospitals already running hard, and you get a map no emergency manager wants to see. The fungal reports were not dots anymore. They were lines. They followed duct renovations, shared maintenance contractors, buried utility corridors, old storm drain paths, and supply routes for the same board product that Crossfield had installed across half the region. The first big argument inside City Hall was over the word infected. Building owners hated it. They wanted contaminated, impacted, water damaged. Anything that sounded temporary. I understood why. Once a structure is called infected, people picture something permanent. Insurance companies get careful. Tenants stop paying. Schools face lawsuits. Hospitals lose public trust. But contaminated did not go far enough. A contaminated countertop can be cleaned. A contaminated room can sometimes be stripped and reopened. These structures had growth inside systems that touched every occupied zone. The organism was not sitting on surfaces waiting for a mop. It was established in cavities, liners, insulation, and wet dust layers. Cleaning the visible patches did not remove the source. Reopening too soon just put warm-breathing people back inside the growth cycle. The science team from Washington University got involved after samples from 3 unrelated buildings showed the same unusual structure. I will explain it the way one researcher explained it to me in a hallway while both of us were wearing respirators and sweating through our shirts. It had fungal threads, but also a heavy mineral load from the insulation product. It trapped fine dust, skin cells, paper fiber, adhesive residue, and moisture. It did not need sunlight. It grew slowly in cool, empty spaces, faster near warm, and fastest where air carried carbon dioxide from occupied rooms. Carbon dioxide is what people breathe out. The organism was not thinking. It was following conditions. Occupied buildings gave it heat, moisture, airflow, and carbon dioxide. Empty buildings slowed it down. Crowded buildings fed it. That is where the public lost its mind, and I cannot blame them. When people heard it grows faster around people, they heard intention, they heard hunting, they heard a monster story. That was not what we were seeing. The growth near exits happened because exits leak air. The growth around classroom doors happened because warm air moved through gaps. The growth around stair towers happened because stack effect pulls air upward in tall buildings, especially when indoor and outdoor temperatures differ. The growth near beds in the hospital happened because supply air, return air, body heat, humid breath, and fabric dust all came together in small occupied rooms. It did not choose a patient, it used the room. That did not make it less terrifying. A thing does not have to understand you to harm you. A bad stair design does not hate the people it traps. Carbon monoxide does not choose a family. Floodwater does not care who is inside the basement. This organism followed physics, building mistakes, and human schedules. Morning arrival made classroom carbon dioxide rise. Afternoon heat made ducts sweat. Evening cleaning crews disturbed dust. Night setback settings changed airflow. Weekend shutdowns let humidity climb in sealed spaces. Then Monday brought people back, and the cycle restarted. On the 4th day, the city ordered inspections of public schools, hospitals, senior facilities, shelters, and municipal buildings renovated in the last 5 years. That sounded strong on television. On the ground, it was chaos. We did not have enough respirators, containment sheeting, portable carbon dioxide meters, moisture meters, thermal cameras, high-efficiency particulate air scrubbers, or trained people. Half the staff who knew old buildings were already working overtime. The other half were being yelled at by property managers who wanted clearance letters. Everybody suddenly wanted the stamp that said safe. Nobody wanted the answer that said we had to open walls and shut down air systems.
My wife, Nora,
worked as an assistant administrator at McKinley Preparatory School near Tower Grove South. I did not mention her on air because I did not want the story to turn into that. She had spent 22 years in schools and knew every ugly thing a building can do to a schedule. Broken boilers, flooded classrooms, fights over asbestos abatement, lead paint notices, water main breaks, heating failures, parent fury, staff shortages, bad buses, Budget meetings where everyone leaves angry. She was practical. When I told her to close her building if she smelled damp air from the vents, she said, "I need more than your nose, Frank." That is how school people talk. They need documentation. They need permission. They need a chain of command because closing a school without authorization can end a career. I went there after my shift, not as her husband first, but as the inspector who had already seen the pattern. McKinley had old bones and new lungs. The original building had brick walls, tall windows, and a basement cafeteria that should never have been converted from storage without a proper moisture plan. The new renovation added sealed windows, a modern air system, acoustic panels, and that same thermocell board in the media rooms, band rooms, and lower hallway. The building had no visible disaster when I arrived. Kids had gone home. A custodian was running a floor machine. The front office smelled clean because someone had used lemon cleaner. The second floor corridor had that damp, flat odor around the vents. I pulled a filter from the air handler with the facility's lead watching me. The filter was 8 days old and looked 3 months past due. The facility's lead, a tired man named Aaron Bell, kept rubbing the back of his neck while I checked the access panel. He had changed filters twice already, and had not logged the first change because he thought it made him look bad. That kind of thing happens all the time. Maintenance workers hide small fixes because bosses treat every fix as evidence of failure. I told him he did not do anything wrong, but I needed every date and every note. The school's carbon dioxide readings had been high in the band room all week. Staff complained about headaches. 2 kids with asthma had gone to the nurse after lunch. The nurse thought it was pollen, because St. Louis pollen gives everyone a reason to suffer. But the hallway readings rose even when the rooms were empty, which told me the return air was not clearing right. I told Nora to close the lower level and keep kids out until a full inspection. She wanted to do it. I saw it in her face. Then the district facilities director called on speaker and said the school had passed a visual check that morning. He used the phrase, false alarm environment. I will never forget that. False alarm environment. That meant too many people were reporting too many problems, and leadership had decided fear was spreading faster than the actual hazard. He told her not to close on one inspector's informal concern, even though I had been invited in by staff. He said they would send a Crossfield crew at 6 the next morning. I told him Crossfield was part of the pattern. He said that was an accusation. He was right, it was. I did not yet have enough proof to say Crossfield caused it. I had enough proof to say Crossfield appeared at too many sites to ignore. Those are different statements, and in a crisis those differences matter. We argued for 7 minutes while Aaron stood by the air handler with a dirty filter in his hands. Nora finally said she would keep the band room closed and send a parent notice about air quality. That was not enough, I knew it then. But knowing something and having the authority to enforce it are not the same thing. The next morning, McKinley reopened under what the district called limited precautionary operations. That meant nothing. It sounded official and changed almost nothing. The band room stayed closed. The lower hallway stayed open because the cafeteria was down there and kids needed breakfast. The Crossfield crew arrived at 6:20 in the morning with containment plastic, air movers, and a supervisor who spoke politely and said all the correct words. They cut into a small section of wall near the band room return chase and found growth behind the panel. They sealed that area, ran air scrubbers, and told the school it was isolated. The problem was that they set the containment under negative pressure without confirming where the return path led. They pulled contaminated air from one cavity into another. By 10:15, teachers smelled dampness in the second-floor classrooms. By 10:40, the school nurse called Nora and said 8 students were coughing. By 11, the main office phones were jammed with parent calls because kids had texted photos of gray fuzz at the edge of a ceiling speaker. At 11:28, the fire alarm panel showed a trouble signal from the lower stairwell smoke detector. At 11:34, a security guard checked the stairwell and found the detector housing wet. At 11:42, Nora called me. I was inside an apartment building in Dutttown looking at a bathroom exhaust shaft that had turned into a spore highway. I answered with my respirator pushed up on my forehead and heard her trying not to sound scared in front of staff. She said, "The lower stairwell door is sticking." That was all she had to say. I told her to pull the fire alarm if any exit was compromised. She said the alarm company had already received a trouble condition and the district wanted confirmation before evacuation. I told her no. Not district, not Crossfield, not confirmation. Pull it, she did. People later argued about whether that was legal. I am telling you now, if you are responsible for a building and you have reason to believe exits are failing, get people out. The paperwork can get handled after children are outside. The evacuation did not go clean. Nothing did that week. The upper grades got out through the front and side exits. The kindergarten hall moved through the gym doors. The lower cafeteria group hit the first real blockage. Growth had pushed out from an expansion joint at the base of the stairwell wall and packed around the door sweep. It had followed the air gap under the door because the stairwell was pulling warm air upward. The custodian got the door open with a floor scraper and a shoulder hit, but a ceiling panel came down behind the line. Not on the kids, thank God, but close enough that the hallway filled with dust and spores. The teachers moved them through the kitchen service exit instead. That exit had no growth because the kitchen exhaust had been running hard all morning and the air was moving out, not in. When I got there, police had blocked part of the street. Parents were already arriving, and Crossfield's supervisor was telling everyone that the growth looked worse than it was. I wanted to hit him, I did not. I walked past him and went to Nora. She had a clipboard in one hand, radio in the other, and that tight school administrator face people use when panic is not allowed yet. She had gotten every child out. 2 staff members went to urgent care for breathing trouble. 4 students went to the hospital for evaluation. Nobody died. People kept saying that to make it sound acceptable. Nobody died, but the building had been reopened after a false all clear, and the evacuation routes had already started failing before lunch. That should have changed the city's whole response. Instead, the city went into argument mode. The school district blamed the contractor. The contractor blamed abnormal humidity and deferred maintenance. The building owner for the charter site blamed the previous tenant. The hospital blamed a subcontractor. The health department said lab confirmation was pending. The mayor said there was no evidence of a city-wide hazard. That sentence ran on every screen while inspectors, nurses, teachers, custodians, and maintenance workers kept sending photos from inside buildings that smelled the same and failed the same way. It was not city-wide, people said. Then it was not regional. Then it was not national. Every phrase was a fence built too late. The first death tied directly to the structures happened in an office building downtown, not a school or hospital. A night security guard got trapped in a stairwell when the door from the 5th floor stuck behind him and the door to the lobby would not open from his side. The building had switched to night ventilation mode. Warm air rose through the stair tower. Growth had packed around the lower frame and into the latch pocket. He called dispatch and said he was having trouble breathing. Firefighters got him out after forcing the lobby door, but he went into respiratory distress on the sidewalk and died at the hospital. His name was Raymond Cole. He was 61 years old. He had reported a damp smell in the stairwell twice that week. I am saying his name because this thing kept getting reduced to property. Square footage lost, school days missed, hospital beds offline, insurance exposure, cleanup cost. The first wave of victims were people with keys and duties, custodians, nurses, security guards, maintenance techs, teachers arriving early, tenants who could not afford to move, patients who could not leave. Old folks in buildings where management said the smell was from the weather. The fungus made buildings unsafe first. And people got hurt because people kept being sent back inside to keep life normal. By day 5, we had a temporary inspection command set up in a county emergency operations room. It looked thrown together because it was. Folding tables, laptops, paper maps, box respirators, coffee gone cold, a printer that jammed every 20 pages, and city staff from departments that rarely spoke to each other. Fire marshals, building inspectors, public health nurses, school facilities people, hospital engineers, environmental consultants, police liaisons, and lawyers. Always lawyers. We built 3 maps, one for confirmed growth, one for suspected air system involvement, one for buildings tied to Crossfield or thermocell installations. The 3rd map looked worse every hour. The product had not gone everywhere, but it had gone into the kinds of places that could not close easily. Schools used it because it was cheap and helped with sound. Clinics used it in waiting rooms and exam corridors. Hospitals used it in renovated wings. Apartment buildings used it in basement conversions and common spaces. Offices used it above drop ceilings. Some older buildings used it during energy retrofits because sealed windows and new insulation looked good on grant paperwork. In the right conditions, that material held moisture without showing a surface leak. It gave the organism a hidden place to establish. Then the air system gave it roots. The first state scientist who briefed us did not call it one organism. She called it a mixed biological matrix, which made everyone tired. Then she broke it down. The samples contained a dominant filamentous fungus, bacteria living in the wet layer, mineral fibers, cellulose, adhesive compounds, and trapped organic dust. That mattered because killing one part did not remove the whole system. Bleach damaged surface growth but left material behind. Heat dried exposed patches but pushed spores into air. Fans spread it. Normal vacuuming aerosolized fine particles and less specialized high-efficiency filtration was used. Painting over it sealed moisture behind the coating and made hidden growth worse. Partial cleaning made people feel better while the building kept failing. That was the moment I knew our normal remediation playbook was not enough. Standard mold remediation can work when the source is limited. You stop the water, contain the area, remove porous damaged material, clean remaining surfaces, dry the structure, filter the air, verify conditions, and fix what caused the problem. Here, the source was not one leak. The source was a combination of material, air movement, moisture, and occupancy. You could clean a classroom and miss the duct liner feeding it. You could replace ceiling tile and miss growth inside a wall chase. You could run air scrubbers and accidentally pull spores through a utility penetration. You could test air at noon and get acceptable numbers, then fail at 3 when the building warmed and filled with people. That is why infected structures cannot simply be cleaned and reopened. I need that said plainly. A building with this kind of established growth is not safe because someone wiped the visible surfaces. It is not safe because a contractor put fans in the hallway. It is not safe because the smell improved for 2 hours. It is not safe because the lobby air sample came back lower than the hallway sample. Safety means the moisture source is controlled. Contaminated porous material is removed, hidden cavities are inspected, air systems are cleaned or replaced where needed, Electrical and fire systems are checked, exits are verified, and the building can stay stable under real occupancy. That takes time, it takes money, it takes honesty. We were short on all three. The public got its first real look inside an infected building when a firefighter helmet camera clip made it online. The call was for an alarm at a medical office in Clayton. The crew entered through the main doors and found no fire. The alarm panel showed multiple duct smoke detector faults. The hallway lights flickered because moisture had reached electrical connections above the ceiling. The firefighters moved down a corridor where the carpet squished underfoot even though no pipe had burst. Ceiling panels sagged in rows under the return duct. The camera caught gray growth, folded over a supply diffuser and pulsing slightly when the air handler cycled. People online kept saying it was breathing. It was not breathing. Air pressure moved it. That did not make the clip easier to watch. The same day, bus routes changed because drivers refused to stop at 2 apartment towers with reported spore releases in the lobbies. That sounds cruel until you understand the fear. Drivers had watched videos of people coughing outside buildings. They had their own families. The transit authority said service would continue where safe. Tenants in those towers said the city was abandoning them. Both sides were right in the ugly way disasters create. A woman on the 11th floor called into a public meeting and said her son had asthma. The elevator smelled damp, and the stairwell door on 9 was swollen. The landlord said inspectors had not confirmed structural infection. The fire marshal heard the word stairwell and sent a crew. They found growth at 3 door frames, 1 clogged roof exhaust, and filters dark with wet dust. The tower was evacuated before midnight. Evacuation is a clean word for a messy process. People do not leave buildings as neat case files. They leave with medicine missing, pets in carriers, kids crying, phone chargers forgotten, grandparents angry, oxygen tanks half full, and neighbors demanding to know where the bus is. They ask how long, they ask who pays. They ask if the clothes on their backs are safe. They ask if their lease still counts. They ask if they can go back for documents, insulin, cash, a laptop, a photo, a work uniform. A contaminated building is not a burning building where the answer is obviously no. It sits there with lights on, windows intact, and a front door that may still open. That makes people think it is negotiable. By the end of the first week, St. Louis had closed 11 schools, parts of 3 hospitals, 2 senior facilities, 4 municipal buildings, 8 apartment buildings, and more offices than I could track. Those are the confirmed closures. The suspected list was worse. The state started receiving reports from Kansas City, Springfield, Columbia, Memphis, Louisville, Indianapolis, and Chicago suburbs. Not all were the same organism. Some were ordinary water damage amplified by fear. Some were bad landlords getting caught. Some were people seeing stains they had ignored for years. But enough matched the pattern that federal teams started asking for purchase records tied to Thermacell shipments and crossfield subcontractors. The first federal call I sat in was useless for the first 20 minutes. Everyone introduced themselves with titles while our phones kept buzzing with new closures. Then an industrial hygienist from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention cut through it. She asked one question. Has anyone confirmed spread through shared utility tunnels? The room got quiet because we had all been thinking it and nobody wanted to say it. St. Louis has old service corridors, hospital tunnels, steam lines, storm drains, basements connected through utility penetrations, and renovation work that opens paths nobody puts on public maps. If growth was using airflow and moisture, then connected buildings were not separate just because they had separate addresses. We checked the hospital complex first because hospitals are full of hidden pathways, tunnels for staff movement, pipes, cables, carts, waste, laundry, oxygen, information technology, steam, chilled water, emergency power, and old routes no one uses unless something breaks. The infected wing in the central west end had been treated as a contained hospital problem. Then maintenance workers found growth in a utility corridor 2 levels below, near a chilled water line with bad insulation and a cable tray leading toward an outpatient building. That did not mean the whole complex was lost. It meant containment had to follow systems, not room numbers. You cannot draw a clean line on a floor plan and call it real if air, water, cables, and people cross it all day. The hospital response was better than the school response because hospital engineers understand pressure and consequences. They shut down affected air handlers, moved patients, isolated corridors, tested negative pressure, sealed penetrations, brought in outside filtration, and stopped letting contractors freelance fixes. They also had people too sick to move easily. That was the hard part. A school can empty if the exits work. A hospital has intensive care rooms, operating rooms, dialysis patients, newborns, respiratory cases, older patients who cannot walk, and staff already exhausted. Moving people creates risk. Not moving people creates risk. The fungus sat in that ugly space between 2 bad options. I walked one of those hospital corridors with a facilities engineer named Priya Shah. She had been awake for 30 hours and still caught details faster than anyone else in the building. She showed me a ceiling access point where the growth had followed condensation along a duct seam, then turned thicker near a return opening outside a nurse's break room. She had carbon dioxide readings from occupied and unoccupied rooms. The fungal growth was heavier where readings had stayed high during night shifts. Again, not intelligence. Conditions, warm rooms, tired staff, closed doors, poor air exchange, fabric furniture, paper notices taped everywhere, dust and ceiling grids, small leaks nobody had time to fix. Hospitals are clean where they are designed and staffed to be clean. Above the ceiling, they can be as complicated and vulnerable as any old building. Then the organism changed, or we finally saw the part it had been doing out of sight. At a vacant municipal records building on Tucker Boulevard, inspectors placed temperature and carbon dioxide loggers in 3 rooms, shut down the air system, and left cameras running. The building had been emptied for 2 days. Growth in the basement stayed slow. Growth in a first-floor records room barely moved. Then one inspector returned to retrieve a logger and spent 12 minutes in the room. The camera later showed growth around the door gap increasing after his visit. The lab people argued about whether this was delayed moisture response, heat from the open door, carbon dioxide, vibration, or airflow disturbance. It was probably all of those. Buildings do not have single causes. They have conditions layered on conditions. After that, the city told inspectors not to enter suspect rooms alone. We used buddy teams, entry logs, portable meters, respirators, disposable suits, sealed bags, and decontamination steps that made every inspection take 3 times longer. People watching from outside thought we were being dramatic. I heard it through masks, windows, and social media. It is just mold. The city wants federal money. The inspectors are scared of basements now. I have been in basements with standing sewage, raccoons, failed boilers, exposed wiring, gas leaks, unstable stairs, and enough roaches to make a grown man reconsider his career. I am not scared of basements. I am scared of a contaminant that turns exits unreliable and makes people think the air is safe because the lights still work. The second week started with rain, not a flood. Just steady rain, 39 degrees cooler than the week before, with humidity high enough to make every old building in the city sweat. Calls tripled. The public hotline crashed by noon. Emergency management told people to report only visible growth near vents, blocked exits, electrical moisture, or acute breathing symptoms. That made sense in theory. In practice, people reported everything because panic has no filter. A man sent 6 photos of normal dust on a ceiling fan. A woman reported mushrooms in a planter. Then a custodian from a courthouse annex sent 1 photo of a return grill sealed by gray material and wrote, "Air still running." That building got priority. We were learning to sort fear from pattern in real time. The courthouse annexes almost became the second mass casualty event. Jury selection was underway in 2 rooms. Staff had complained about smell all morning. Someone turned the thermostat down because the rooms felt stuffy, and that kicked the air handler harder. Within an hour, people near the returns were coughing. A ceiling tile fell in a side corridor. The fire alarm system showed duct detector trouble. Security started moving people out, but one stairwell door stuck on the 3rd floor. Deputies forced it open. The exit blockage was not total, but it delayed enough people that the evacuation backed up into the corridor. If there had been smoke or fire, people would have died. We condemned the affected sections before the afternoon news. That evening, the governor finally used the words regional building contamination emergency. It was too careful, but it opened funding. National Guard engineering teams came in to help with logistics, not combat. People hear guard and picture rifles. What we needed were generators, tents, transport radios, traffic control, portable lighting, water, mobile medical support, and disciplined people who can set up operations in a parking lot without whining. Schools moved to remote packets. Church basements were checked and sometimes rejected, gymnasiums were inspected, and shelters were set up outside affected zones. The bitter joke was that we were safer in tents than in some buildings designed to protect people. A lot of people asked why we did not just shut every building with that insulation. That sounds logical until you try to do it. First, records were incomplete. Owners did not always know what subcontractors installed. Some renovations had changed hands twice. Some materials had been substituted during shortages. Some buildings had thermocell board and no growth because moisture stayed controlled. Some buildings had no thermocell and serious growth because spores traveled through connected systems or other cellulose material. Some buildings had ordinary mold and nothing more. If you close everything, you destroy hospitals, schools, housing, courts, shelters, and businesses without knowing where people can safely go. If you close too little, people get sick or trapped. The job was triage, and triage feels cruel when the patient is a city. Crossfield held a press conference on day 9. Their chief operating officer stood at a podium with clean hands and said the company had followed all industry standards. He said there was no conclusive evidence their work introduced the organism. He said moisture intrusion was the responsibility of property owners. He said improper maintenance could void any remediation guarantee. He said the company was cooperating fully. I watched from the emergency operations room with 6 other inspectors. Nobody spoke for a while after it ended. Then Aaron Bell, the facilities lead from McKinley, who had been helping us map school systems after his building closed, said, "He never said the buildings were safe." That was the truest sentence in the room. The records that mattered did not come from Crossfield. They came from a warehouse worker in Sauget, across the river, who had kept shipping photos because he was fighting a pay dispute. The photos showed pallets of thermocell board stored after a roof leak under torn plastic for weeks before delivery. Some pallets had visible staining. The lot numbers matched shipments used in schools, clinics, and apartment retrofits. That still did not prove the organism started there. It proved contaminated or moisture-compromised material entered occupied buildings and got sealed behind walls. Once sealed, it had food, darkness, and a delayed trigger. Add a wet season, poor ventilation, and people breathing all day, and the problem woke up. I hate the phrase woke up. It sounds too alive in the wrong way, but that is what people inside those buildings felt. A wall that looked fine Monday had a bulge Wednesday. A vent cleaned Friday showed gray edges Sunday. A stair door that opened during morning rounds stuck by lunch. Ceiling tiles that passed visual inspection sagged after one humid night. The real explanation was growth rate under favorable conditions, hidden reservoirs, and airflow. The lived experience was simpler. People trusted a room and the room failed them. The worst rescue I witnessed happened at St. Agnes Community Hospital, a small facility south of the city that had already taken overflow patients from a larger hospital. A surgical recovery area had been converted during renovation with the same acoustic panels and duct liner. Staff noticed odor but kept working because patient load was high. At 3:17 in the afternoon, the air handler faulted, then restarted. That restart pushed a visible burst from 2 supply vents. Nurses began moving patients before administration gave the order. One patient was on oxygen. Another had just come out from a procedure. A ceiling grid near the exit sagged and dropped enough wet material to block a bed. Staff lifted the bed frame and carried the patient around it. No one waited for perfect instructions. That saved lives. I arrived after the evacuation when the corridor was empty except for alarms, wet footprints, abandoned gloves, and ceiling debris. The growth had formed thickest above the recovery bays around return air paths and pipe penetrations. Electrical crews killed power to the affected wing because moisture had entered junction boxes. Fire crews checked exits and found 2 doors with early growth at the frames. Hospital engineers kept asking whether they could clean and reopen with portable filtration. They had patients waiting. They had surgeries delayed. They had staff crying in break areas. I told them the truth. Not that day. Probably not that week. Maybe never without stripping the wing to structure and replacing systems. One administrator said, "Do you know what that costs?" I said, "Yes." Less than pretending. That answer made me sound tougher than I felt. By then I was running on bad sleep, vending machine food, and the kind of anger that makes your hands shake when nobody is looking. I had my wife safe. That mattered. A lot of people did not. People were sleeping in cars outside apartment buildings because shelters were full or because they did not trust any indoor shelter. Teachers were packing classroom materials into sealed bins while wearing respirators. Nurses were working in temporary wards and parking structures after engineers confirmed the open decks were safer than the indoor wing. Parents were taking children to clinics for coughs and being told to wait outside under tents. Office workers were being told to come back once testing cleared, then testing did not clear. The city's social order bent in practical ways before it bent in dramatic ways. Hardware stores ran out of respirators, plastic sheeting, duct tape, filters, box fans, and moisture meters. Box fans were the worst purchase people could make if they used them wrong, but they bought them anyway. Landlords tried to hire unlicensed crews. Unlicensed crews spread contamination. Waste haulers refused unlabeled bags full of ceiling tile and insulation. Schools fought over which buildings could host displaced students. Hospitals competed for portable air scrubbers. Insurance adjusters demanded documentation from structures inspectors could not safely enter. Every phone call had money under it. Every delay had lungs under it. By day 12, we had our first confirmed case of growth, sealing a main entrance in an occupied apartment lobby. It was a 12-story building north of Del Mar. Older concrete frame, brick exterior, renovated lobby, new mailroom, sealed windows in corridors, poor exhaust in trash rooms. Tenants had complained of smell near the elevators. Management put out fragrance machines, which should be criminal in every building code when dampness is involved. Fragrance does not fix moisture. It hides warning. The lobby growth formed behind decorative wall panels, then pushed out around the mailboxes and door frames where outside air came in and warm. Interior air leaked out. The front doors still opened, but the vestibule ceiling dropped pieces when people moved through. Firefighters evacuated by rear exits and stairwells, checking every door before sending tenants down. One old man refused to leave because he thought evacuation meant losing his apartment. A firefighter stayed with him for 20 minutes while crews moved others. The man kept saying he had nowhere to go. That was not stubbornness. That was math, rent, medicine, furniture, papers, food, neighbors, bus route, doctor, church, all tied to one address. The fungus turned addresses into hazards. City life depends on addresses. Without an address, everything gets harder. Mail, benefit, school enrollment, prescriptions, work schedules, court notices, family contact. People do not just leave buildings. They leave the system that knows where to find them. We started using color tags on buildings. Green for no evidence after inspection. Yellow for limited contamination with controls. Orange for air system involvement requiring restricted entry. Red for unsafe occupancy. Black for no entry without specialized teams because of structural, electrical, or severe respiratory hazard. People hated black tags. They took photos of them and accused us of marking buildings for demolition. Some might need demolition later, but that was not what the tag meant. It meant the building could not be trusted to keep people alive during entry. I signed my first black tag on an old-school annex where the basement ceiling, main electrical room, and stairwell frames were contaminated. My hand paused before I wrote my name. A signature can feel heavier when it empties a building. The organism kept teaching us. That is not a poetic statement. It is how fieldwork goes. You think you understand a failure, then the failure shows another condition. At first we watched wet basements, then vents, then stairwells, then utility tunnels, then elevator shafts. Elevator shafts became a serious concern because they move air vertically and connect floors through gaps, doors, machine rooms, and pressure changes. In one office tower, growth appeared in the elevator lobby on floors 2, 6, and 11, but not 3, 4, or 5. People online called that impossible. It was not. The affected floors had renovation work tied to the same return chase and shared ceiling materials. Buildings are not stacked apartments in a child's drawing. They are layered systems with shortcuts everywhere. Schools were the emotional center, but hospitals were the operational center. Once hospitals lost wings, every ambulance route changed. Emergency rooms backed up. Clinics moved outside. Dialysis schedules broke. Pharmacies inside affected buildings closed. Medical record systems were accessible, but the rooms holding some local servers had to be shut down in 2 facilities because moisture threatened equipment. Ambulances idled in lines while staff screened patients under tents. People started avoiding care because they feared buildings. That fear caused real harm. A man with chest pain stayed home because he thought the hospital air would kill him. He died before paramedics reached him. Disasters do not kill in one direction. The national media arrived late and loud. They wanted the clean version. Killer fungus in buildings, mold outbreak, city under spore siege. I refused 3 interviews because the producers asked if the fungus had intelligence. On the 4th, I agreed only if they let me talk about building systems. They regretted it within 30 seconds. I told viewers that the scariest part was not a creature. It was deferred maintenance, cheap materials, sealed buildings without moisture control, contractors moving faster than oversight, and public officials treating air quality as a public relations problem. I said the organism was new in scale, maybe new in biology, but the path it used had been waiting inside our walls for years. That got me called political. Fine. Buildings are political because budgets are political. Ventilation is political when one school gets new systems and another gets patch filters. Housing is political when tenants report damp walls and get ignored. Hospitals are political when capacity stays tight every normal week and then wing closes. Inspection staffing is political. Contractor oversight is political. Emergency shelters are political. You can keep saying just mold until a stair door fails, but the door does not care about your argument. The research teams eventually gave the organism a provisional name that nobody outside the lab used. In the field, we called it building fungus. Wall fungus, duct growth, gray mat, or that damn stuff. Lab reports said it produced spores in disturbed airflow and fragments that could carry on. Dust. It tolerated a wide temperature range found in occupied buildings. It grew best when relative humidity stayed high and carbon dioxide rose above normal outdoor levels. It showed increased growth near vibration sources, including fans, compressors, elevators, and heavy foot traffic. Again, not thought. Mechanical stimulus, airflow, moisture, and nutrients. A building full of people and machines gave it everything. The first attempt to burn it out failed in a controlled test, and thank God it was controlled. A private owner outside the city hired a crew to heat treat an affected wing after reading about bedbug remediation. They raised temperatures in rooms, but the wall cavities did not heat evenly. Warm air carried moisture deeper into cooler assemblies. Growth retreated from exposed surfaces and expanded behind panels near cooler ducts. Some spores survived. Electrical insulation softened near one overloaded circuit because temporary heaters drew too much power. The fire department stopped the work. After that, emergency orders banned unapproved heat treatment, ozone blasting, fogging chemicals, and fan drying in suspect buildings. People still tried. People always try the cheap fix first when the real fix threatens everything. Nora went back to work from a folding table inside a recreation center that had passed inspection. She spent her days tracking students, staff, medications, special education plans, meal pickups, buses, and families displaced from contaminated apartments. She was not trapped anymore, but the building followed her in phone calls. A parent wanted to retrieve a child's inhaler. A teacher wanted grade books. A counselor wanted student records. The district wanted to know if McKinley could reopen in 2 weeks. Nora looked at me from across our kitchen that night and asked, "Can it?" I said no. She nodded once, then went back to her laptop. That was the whole conversation. Some facts do not need more words. By day 15, the riverfront warehouses became a new front. Those buildings had old brick walls, timber beams, patched roofs, and decades of unknown storage. Several had been converted into offices and event spaces with sealed interiors and modern ductwork. One building hosted a wedding reception the weekend before anyone noticed the smell. Guests later reported coughing and eye irritation. The event hall owner insisted the building had passed inspection for occupancy. It probably had at the time. Occupancy inspections are not magic. They verify conditions seen and tested under a limited window. They do not guarantee that hidden biological growth will not accelerate after 300 warm bodies spend 4 hours dancing under a duct system full of damp liner. I inspected that hall with a fire marshal and an industrial hygienist. The dance floor looked normal. The bar looked normal. The bathrooms looked recently cleaned. Then we opened the ceiling above the coat room where people had complained about a damp odor. The return duct liner had peeled inward under fungal mass. The growth followed the duct, then spread down wires to a junction box and across the top of gypsum board partitions. The owner kept saying there had been no visible problem during the wedding. I believed him. That is what made it worse. Buildings can hide failure until occupancy pushes them past the line. People think visible means real. Hidden is often more real. The first national advisory told people to watch for persistent damp odor, rapid filter clogging, unexplained moisture near vents or ceiling fixtures, gray or tan fibrous growth at air grills, doors swelling without water at the floor, respiratory symptoms that worsen indoors and improve outside, and ceiling panels sagging under duct runs. It told building managers not to run fans across visible growth, not to restart failed air systems before inspection, and not to reopen closed areas based only on surface cleaning. The advisory also said most mold in homes was still ordinary. That sentence mattered because panic can make people hurt themselves. A family in Jefferson County nearly poisoned themselves mixing cleaners in a bathroom because they thought every stain was the new fungus. Homes were not immune, but the major spread favored larger buildings because larger buildings share air and hide more systems. Single-family homes with good ventilation, dry basements, and no contaminated material were less at risk. That did not comfort people in apartment buildings, nursing homes, hospitals, schools, dorms, offices, and shelters. Modern life had concentrated people indoors for efficiency. The organism exploited efficiency. Shared ducts, shared corridors, shared laundry, shared trash rooms, shared maintenance crews, shared contractors, shared mistakes. The second death cluster happened in a senior facility that should have been evacuated sooner. I am not going to name it here because families still live with enough pain, and the investigation has already named it in public records. The facility had a renovated dining room and corridor with a suspect material. Staff reported odor. Management moved activities to another wing but kept residents in nearby rooms because moving them required ambulances and beds elsewhere. Overnight, the air handler serving that corridor clogged and humidity spiked. 2 residents with serious lung conditions declined fast. A nurse and an aide got sick helping move people in the early morning. By sunrise, the facility was surrounded by ambulances, and the building received a red tag before breakfast. That case broke the public's patience. Up to then, some people thought school closures were overcaution and office closures were economic pain. When older residents started coming out under blankets into cold morning air because the building meant to care for them had become dangerous, the argument changed. The governor requested federal disaster support. The Department of Housing and Urban Development began emergency placement coordination. The Environmental Protection Agency sent building contamination specialists. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration issued worker guidance. Insurance companies sent teams of lawyers who looked afraid to touch anything. Crossfield stopped taking calls. On day 18, I entered the Crossfield warehouse with a state team and a warrant. That sounds bigger than it felt. It was a low industrial building with stained concrete floors, metal racks, a front office with cheap chairs, and a break room where someone had left instant oatmeal on the counter. Normal place, normal fluorescent lights, normal forklift marks. The storage area smelled damp before the loading doors opened. Pallets of leftover boards sat under plastic. Some had gray staining along the lower edges. The company had moved recent lots to another site, but records and dust do not vanish easily. Samples came off pallet wrap, floor cracks, forklift tires, and cutting equipment. The cutting saw was the worst. Fine dust packed inside the guard had fungal material in it. Every board cut there could have carried contaminated dust. The warehouse manager kept saying the material met fire rating. He was stuck on the wrong safety question. Fire resistance does not mean biological safety. Low smoke development does not mean moisture stability. Recycled content does not mean clean content. A wall product can pass one test and fail in real use when storage, installation, humidity, and ventilation go bad. That is not anti-environmental. It is pro-reality. Green products still need dry storage, quality control, and field testing. Cheap public work still needs oversight. Old buildings still need moisture analysis before anyone seals them tight and congratulates himself for efficiency. The state issued a stop-use order for the product until further notice. By then, the product was already in walls across multiple states. Records showed shipments to Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, and parts of Ohio. That did not mean every building was infected. It meant every building with those lots needed review, especially if moisture problems, odor, or air system complaints had followed. National news finally stopped treating St. Louis as a weird local story. Then other cities started sending their own clips. A school hallway in Evansville with gray growth at vents. A clinic in Little Rock with clogged filters. A municipal building in Paducah with swelling stair doors. A dormitory near Champaign with coughing clusters. Some were confirmed, some not. The fear traveled faster than lab results. I started recording these updates at night because the official briefings were too careful. I am not accusing every official of lying. Some were doing the best they could with bad information and worse pressure. But public language gets sanded down until people cannot tell what matters. Avoid affected areas does not help a tenant who smells damp air in the only hallway to the stairs. Consult your building manager does not help when the building manager is hiding complaints. Professional remediation may be required does not explain that the wrong crew can make things worse. People needed plain talk, so I gave it. First to local calls, then to anyone who shared the recordings. Here is plain talk. If you are in a building with suspected growth near vents, do not wait for someone to prove the whole building is bad. Move away from that air zone. If a stair door is sticking, report it as a life safety emergency, not a maintenance issue. If filters clog in days, the filter's not the problem. It is evidence. If you smell dampness after the air kicks on, pay attention to the system. If management uses fragrance machines, demand actual inspection. If a contractor wants to fog chemicals through ducts without opening and inspecting contaminated material, stop him if you can. If officials say a building is clear, ask what was inspected, what was opened, what air handlers served the affected rooms, what moisture readings showed, and whether the building was tested under occupancy.
I know that sounds demanding, it is.
People became sick because polite questions got polite answers that meant nothing. Was mold removed? From where? Was air tested? When, where, and under what conditions? Was the water source fixed? Which source? Roof pipe, condensation, stormwater, groundwater, humid air, wet material. Poor drainage. Was the air system cleaned? Filters changed, ducts opened, liners removed, coils cleaned, drain pans cleared, returns checked. Dampers tested? Words hide missing work. Buildings punish missing work. The organism reached the old downtown tunnels in a limited way, but the rumor grew bigger than the truth. People said fungus was crawling under the whole city. No. What we found were isolated, contaminated utility corridors where moisture, dust, and airflow allowed growth, especially near buildings already affected. That was bad enough. Utility corridors let workers move through hidden spaces. They carry lines and cables. They can connect basements. If you contaminate those spaces, repair crews lose access to the very systems needed to keep buildings safe. One steam leak that would normally be fixed in an afternoon took 2 days because entry required protective gear, air monitoring, and decontamination. During those 2 days, humidity rose in connected spaces and made everything worse. The weather turned colder near the end of week 3, and some people thought that would save us. It helped in empty buildings where heat stayed low. It hurt in occupied buildings because heating systems ran harder, indoor air dried in some rooms, condensation formed in others, and pressure differences increased between warm interiors and cold exterior walls. Stack effect pulled air through cracks, stairwells, shafts, and door gaps. Growth appeared at window perimeters and a few sealed renovations because warm, moist indoor air found cold surfaces behind trim. Again, the lesson was not one simple rule. The lesson was moisture, air, heat, material, and occupancy. Change one and the pattern changes. A national anchor asked me if St. Louis would become uninhabitable. I told him that was the wrong question. Cities do not fail all at once. They lose functions. A school closes, a hospital wing closes, a courthouse delays hearings, apartments evacuate, shelters fill. Maintenance crews get sick, contractors run out, waste piles up, parents miss work, clinics overflow, fire inspectors cannot clear enough buildings. Confidence drops, people stop trusting indoor air. A city can still have traffic, restaurants, police, lights, and sports talk while its safe indoor capacity collapses piece by piece. That is where we were. Not gone, not normal, not close to normal. Nora's school never reopened. The district fought that decision for 2 weeks. Then engineers opened enough walls to end the argument. The lower hallway had growth inside wall cavities, the return chase sealing plenums and around multiple door frames. The band room acoustic panels were full of it. The cafeteria ceiling had moisture trapped above new panels. The main electrical room was clean, which saved some equipment, but the fire alarm wiring in 2 corridors needed replacement. The cost to strip, rebuild, retest, and keep the old building safe was more than the district could approve during an active emergency. They moved students across 4 temporary locations. Nora kept a list of every child who needed transport. That list mattered more than the building. I went back inside McKinley once after it was empty and tagged black for restricted entry pending abatement. Classrooms without children feel wrong even when clean. These were not clean. Desks sat in rows with worksheets still stacked. A lunch menu hung near the office. Someone had left a paper snowflake project taped to a window. I'm not giving it a hidden meaning. It was just there, and it bothered me because ordinary objects make failed buildings harder to accept. The hallway smelled damp even with the air off. Growth had thickened around the lower stairwell where Nora had first called me. The door opened only after the fire marshal forced it. If she had waited for confirmation, children could have been stuck there. I took photographs, moisture readings, samples, and notes. That is what inspectors do when feelings have no use. The growth followed the return air path, not the prettiest surfaces. It thickened near warm leakage points, not random walls. It used door undercuts, chases, seams, and penetrations. The main entry stayed mostly clear because outside air movement and sunlight through glass changed conditions. The interior corridors were worse. That told us something. The building was not haunted. It was badly matched to a contaminant that understood nothing but conditions. The horror was mechanical, biological, and bureaucratic all at once. By week 4, the first demolition debate began. Some structures could be saved. That mattered. We were not burning the city down. Buildings with limited, accessible contamination and controllable moisture could be remediated through removal, replacement, cleaning, drying, air system work, and verification. Others were too compromised. Old porous materials, unknown cavities, contaminated duct liner, electrical damage, repeated spore releases, blocked exits, and no affordable way to access hidden spaces meant long-term closure or demolition. Owners begged for cheaper answers. I understood. A condemned building can erase a lifetime of work. But letting people occupy a structure that cannot keep exits clear or air breathable is not compassion. It is delayed harm. The courts got involved fast. Tenants sued landlords, parents sued districts, workers sued contractors, Crossfield sued suppliers. Suppliers blamed storage and installation. Insurers denied claims. Cities sought emergency funds. Everybody wanted a document proving someone else was responsible. Responsibility matters, but while lawyers fought, we still had to decide which door could open and which wing could house patients. Fieldwork kept going under the noise. We inspected, we tagged, we argued, we corrected mistakes, we missed some things and found them later. Anybody who says the response was clean is selling something. One mistake still keeps me up. We cleared a small public library branch for limited reopening after visible growth was removed from a staff workroom. The building had no thermocell records, and air samples looked acceptable during testing. 3 days later, staff reported odor near the children's reading area. We returned and found growth inside an old return chase that had not been on the current. Mechanical drawings because the building had been modified in stages. The new system still used part of the old chase as a dead air pathway. It had collected dust and moisture for years. Occupancy changed pressure enough to pull spores into the reading area. No one became seriously sick, but the branch closed again. I signed the first clearance. I signed the closure too. Both signatures were mine. That is why I get angry when people talk about certainty as a free thing. In an emergency, you make decisions with incomplete information. Waiting for perfect proof can kill. Acting too broadly can harm people too. The answer is not confidence. The answer is humility with teeth. You say what you know, what you do not know, what you are doing next, and what would change the decision. Then you document everything. You do not hide behind vague words. You do not reopen a school because a contractor wants to get paid. You do not tell tenants to wait because an owner is embarrassed. You do not treat coughing workers as public relations problems. The fungus did not stay confined to St. Louis, but St. Louis became the place everyone studied because we were early and loud. Federal teams built a national registry of affected buildings tied to suspect material lots, moisture events, and air system complaints. Emergency grants funded temporary classrooms, outdoor clinics, and mobile inspection units. Manufacturers fought new testing rules. Building owners complained about ventilation reporting requirements. Inspectors from other states called us at night asking what to look for. I told each one the same thing: follow the air, follow the moisture, follow the material. Follow the complaints from people who spend the most time inside, especially custodians and nurses. They notice first because they live with the building. The organism's reaction to carbon dioxide became the public's obsession. But in practice, it became one more tool. We started using carbon dioxide mapping to identify poorly ventilated zones and likely growth acceleration areas. High indoor carbon dioxide does not prove fungus. It proves people's exhaled air is building up. In a contaminated building, that matters because it indicates low ventilation and more favorable growth conditions. Portable meters became common in schools and offices. Some were cheap and unreliable, but even imperfect attention helped. People began asking about outdoor air rates, filter ratings, humidity control, and maintenance logs. That should have happened years earlier. It took a disaster to make indoor air visible to public thought. There were scams immediately. Fake inspectors, fake clearance certificates, fogging services with miracle claims, supplements for spore exposure. Landlords painting over growth and calling it sealed. Influencers walking into contaminated buildings for views. One man broke into a closed school with a camera and came out coughing, then claimed the government had planted the fungus. He spent 2 days in the hospital. The video still got millions of views. I learned that facts compete poorly with footage when people are scared. So we kept producing our own footage, not dramatic. Access panels opening, filters weighed, moisture readings, door frames checked. Duct liner removed, lab results explained. Boring truth saves more people than exciting lies. The most useful public demonstration we did was with 2 clear plastic boxes, a small fan, damp fiber, and harmless theatrical fog to show airflow. We put fog in one compartment and ran the fan. The fog moved through gaps nobody in the audience had noticed, under a door, around a pipe, through a ceiling opening, into the return path. Then we shut the fan off and showed how the fog settled. People finally understood why just close the door was not enough and why just clean that. Room could fail. Buildings leak air in ways people cannot see. The fungus used those leaks. The demonstration did not need fear. It needed visibility. By the 5th week, outdoor temporary life became normal in pieces of the city. Schools held meal pickup under tents. Hospital triage worked under heated canopies. Court hearings moved online or into inspect spaces. Apartment evacuees lived in hotels, churches, gymnasiums, and relatives' houses. Some businesses never reopened. Some reopened after real remediation and strict monitoring. Downtown felt half alive during the day and strangely empty after dark because office towers with red tags had no workers. Restaurants in clear buildings put signs in windows listing inspection dates and air system status. It sounded ridiculous months earlier. Now people checked those signs before eating. I kept doing updates because official news moved on whenever there was no dramatic footage. That is another thing people need to know. A crisis can still be active after cameras get bored. Crews were still opening walls. Families were still displaced. Nurses were still working in temporary wards. Kids were still riding longer bus routes. Maintenance workers were still entering suspect mechanical rooms with respirators. Lab teams were still arguing about species origin, mutation, storage, and liability. The public wants a beginning, middle, and end. Buildings do not heal on a broadcast schedule. The origin never became one clean answer. The strongest theory was that contaminated lots of cellulose mineral board, stored wet and cut without proper dust control, carried or supported a fungal system that spread into certain buildings after installation. The wet season activated it. Poor moisture management fed it. Ventilation systems distributed fragments. Occupancy accelerated growth through heat, humidity, carbon dioxide, and vibration. Utility pathways linked some structures. Bad remediation spread it in others. That is not a simple villain story. It is messier and more believable, which is why people resisted it. Monster can be killed. A chain of bad decisions has to be taken apart link by link. Crossfield collapsed before the lawsuits finished. That did not fix the buildings. The supplier changed its name. That did not fix the buildings. The city replaced some procurement rules. That helped later, not then. Building codes began moving towards stricter moisture commissioning for renovations, better documentation of duct materials, mandatory filter change logs for public buildings, and post-remediation occupancy testing under real conditions. Those changes were good. They were also written after children had evacuated through contaminated halls and patients had been wheeled into parking lots. Rules often arrive late with clean language and dirty fingerprints. I have been asked what sound the fungus made. Most of the time, nothing. That is the truth. It did not roar or hiss. It made buildings quieter in some places because ducts clogged and airflow dropped. Sometimes you heard ceiling panels creak from moisture. Sometimes a fan strained against loaded filters. Sometimes a door scraped against growth in the frame. Sometimes droplets hit a trash can from a light fixture. The worst sound was a normal building noise in the wrong context. Air moving through a vent after you knew the vent might be contaminated. A fire alarm in a hallway where an exit might stick. A school bell in a building that should have been empty. People also ask if I got sick. I had a cough for 2 weeks and headaches that came and went. My lung tests were acceptable. Nora had irritation after McKinley, but she recovered. Others did not recover so cleanly. Some developed persistent respiratory problems. Some workers left building trades altogether. One hospital engineer I knew retired early after spending 26 days straight moving patients and isolating systems. Aaron Bell took a job with the state inspection team. He said he was done being the guy who changes filters and gets ignored. I was glad. We needed people who knew the smell of a bad hallway before the meter caught up. The city changed in small, visible ways. People stopped laughing at maintenance logs. Tenants photographed vents when they moved into apartments. School boards got asked about humidity control. Hospitals published indoor air updates. Contractors had to show storage records for moisture-sensitive materials. Some landlords complained that people had become impossible. Good. People should be impossible when their children's air is treated as an expense line. But fear also lingered where it did not belong. A clean old basement still made some people panic. A harmless stain could empty a room. We had to teach caution without teaching helplessness. The last building I inspected before making this full recording was an old office near Lafayette Square that had been converted from a small factory. It had suspect material in 2 conference rooms, confirmed growth in 1 return chase, and clean structure elsewhere. The owner wanted all or nothing. Either save the building fast or condemn it forever. Real work did not give him either answer. We removed contaminated materials, replaced duct sections, dried walls, improved drainage, added monitoring, and kept it closed until occupancy testing under full load stayed clean. It took months. It cost a lot. It reopened. That matters too. Not every infected structure is lost. But every saved structure was saved by admitting the problem was real. The hardest buildings were the ones people loved. Schools with murals, churches with food pantries, neighborhood clinics, old apartment buildings where families had lived for decades. A city is not just architecture, but do not let anyone tell you buildings are replaceable without pain. A building holds routines, a bus stop, a lunchroom, a pharmacy counter, a stairwell everyone complains about, a lobby where neighbors nod to each other, a classroom where a child feels safe. When those places become unsafe, the loss is practical first. Then it becomes emotional after everyone has time to breathe. I am recording this because reopening has started, and I can already hear the pressure building. People are tired. Budgets are wrecked. Owners are desperate. Parents need normal school days. Hospitals need beds. Courts need rooms. Businesses need rent. Everybody wants someone with a clipboard to say it is over. I cannot say that. I can say we know more than we did. We know how it moves. We know what conditions help it. We know which materials and systems require special attention. We know visible cleaning is not enough. We know carbon dioxide, humidity, filtration, and maintenance logs are not boring side issues. We know a stuck door can be the first honest warning a building gives. If you are listening from another city and your officials are still saying this cannot happen there, do not panic, but do not relax into ignorance. Ask for records. Ask what materials were installed. Ask whether damp complaints were tracked. Ask if schools and hospitals can identify which air handler serves which rooms. Ask whether fire doors are checked during humid conditions, not only on a dry inspection day. Ask if filters are changed by schedule or by pressure readings. Ask whether old duct liner is still in place. Ask whether renovations sealed moisture inside walls. Ask whether maintenance workers have a way to report patterns without getting punished for making the building look bad. The fungus began in a way boring enough to ignore because most real disasters do. A damp smell. A filter changed early. A cough near a vent. A ceiling tile with a stain. A contractor saying it was handled. A school reopening because parents needed answers. A hospital wing staying open because beds were full. A landlord waiting for proof. A city choosing calm words over clear words. Then one door opened 3 inches and stopped, and all the ignored pieces lined up in front of us. I still think about that door at Grava Arts, not because it was the worst thing I saw. It was not. I think about it because it was simple. A door either opens or it does not. No press statement can soften that. No contractor certificate can argue with that. No budget meeting can vote it open. The fungus did not need to attack anyone. It only had to grow where warm air leaked and where people assumed the building would keep doing its job. So here is the final warning from a man who has spent half his life in basements, boiler rooms, roof hatches, school corridors, hospital service tunnels, and old brick buildings that complain every time the weather changes. Do not trust a building because it looks normal. Do not distrust every building because fear feels safer than thought. Trust inspection, records, airflow, moisture control, honest maintenance, and people who tell you bad news before the bad news becomes an evacuation. If the walls start growing again, the first sign may not be a headline. It may be a smell near a vent, a filter too heavy for its age, a stair door dragging at the bottom, or a room full of people getting quiet because everyone is trying not to cough. And if someone tells you it has been cleaned, ask what they opened, ask what they removed, ask what they tested after people came back, then ask whether every exit still opens.